Grüß, willkommen in einem Aufregens video. Welcome to another exciting video, in this case episode 6 of my Wargaming Rules Review series. In this video I'll provide an overview of DBN, specifically version 2.1 which was published in 2008. There were earlier versions of which I do not have a copy, and I'm uncertain if there are any later versions than this at this point in time. When I first saw these sets of rules, I ordered what I thought were the rules. Instead, I received a campaign guide, so the rules I ended up with was a PDF version available from the internet, which I could download after paying the appropriate amount of money. The objective is to allow potential players to determine if these rules are suitable for them by looking at the basic elements of the rules, as per all my other videos related to rules reviews. I feel the most important aspect of any rules is its scale, as this affects a host of other factors such as what type of game you would expect, what amount of movement, and to a lesser extent the force mixes you require to field. The next most important factor is the game system, such as sequence of play, visibility, movement, and fire combat system. This will tell you how historically accurate or otherwise a set of rules is. While requiring you to actually play a game, the gameplay tells you how easy or difficult playing a game actually is. This requires, as I indicated, playtesting, as it cannot be derived from reading the rules. And once you've done this, this tells you how playable the rules are in terms of long-term or longevity gaming. When considering learning the rules, this is a combination of complexity, rules presentation, and examples. It's quite possible that simple game systems can be difficult to learn and complex game systems can be easy to learn. So while affected by the complexity of the rules, other factors come into play which need to be considered. The final factor, which I consider to be very important, is supporting material, which is required for players to create force mixes, set up a game, and play the game. Many free rules may be quite good, but if they lack cheat sheets, equipment lists, army lists, and scenarios, then they don't have much chance of succeeding in the long term. This requires players to make an enormous amount of effort to simply get a game off the ground, and many players simply don't bother. DBN are based on DBA and clearly went through a number of changes. In summary, they are designed for 15mm players to have a game on a playing area which is 2 feet square with 12 points per side. While the number of elements do vary a bit, we can assume this averages out to 12 elements per side. While there is a version which uses a 3 feet wide by 2 feet deep playing area and 24 points per side, the rules were specifically designed for a 2-foot playing area, square, and that is where they shine. As with DBA, this is very much an element maneuver game, where the way you maneuver elements gives you victory or causes you to lose. There is certainly nothing wrong with this, and it gives you a game, but this may not be what some players are looking for in a set of rules. The basing is reasonably standard for the UK, with elements being 4 centimetres wide and 2 to 3 and 4 centimetres deep, depending on the element that fits or the figure that fits on top of the element. However, an optional basing system is suggested where infantry are placed on a 3 centimetre deep base in 2 ranks. This is the way I originally based my DBN force mix, as you can see in the images in this video. While for DBN I like it because you rarely have elements behind each other, for other rules I never base my infantry 2 ranks deep, with the exception of my US basing system. It's a lot of figures for little benefit, I feel, and does not allow for much diorama on the base, if that's your thing. Saying that, I like the idea of standardizing all infantry and cavalry bases as 3 centimetres deep. I must admit DBM suggests it's 2.5 centimetres deep, but I don't know anyone who does not use 3 centimetre deep bases. I'm planning on basing my new infantry figures on 3 centimetre deep bases, but with 1 rank, so I can put more bling on the base. It also allows me to use movement trays which use 4 by 3 centimetre slots. However, I must admit when I originally designed or created this video, this was the case. I've abandoned that particular plan. If we look at a 12-point battle, the forces which each player could be expected to command is about 20,000 to 30,000 men, which represents 12 to 18 elements, with 18 elements being rather rare. So a Prussian 1815 army could consist of 4 musketeer regular, 8 musketeer Landwehr, which costs 9 points, and 2 light cavalry, 2 light cavalry Landwehr, and 1 artillery, which gives me a force mix of 17 elements at a cost of 12 points. This gives me an army of 24,000 to 30,000 infantry, 4,800 to 6,000 cavalry, and 18 cannons. That is, cannons which are not embedded in the infantry formations. This represents a force as large as the Prussian First Corps in 1815. This allows you to refight Marengo with ease, but a larger conflict such as Ligny would require 36 points if not more. This can be done with more than one player commanding a single Prussian corps each. Of course, the Prussian corps in 1815 was rather large, and this would represent about 4 French corps. These rules really don't seem to be designed to reproduce historical battles. The other factor to consider is element width. The Prussian force of 17 elements would cover a front line of 68 centimetres, which is wider than your preferred 2 feet or 60 centimetres. A more reasonable force would be 12 elements, which would span a maximum of 48 centimetres, allowing for the flanks to remain reasonably empty. I could not find any ground scale apart from the 100 paces equal to 2.5 centimetres. If a pace is 60 centimetres, then the ground scale is 1 in 24,000, or 60 metres equals 2.5 centimetres for 15 mil. This means our 2,000 to 2,400 man element would have a frontage of about 100 metres, rounded up. In paces, it would be 160 paces. This is a density of 15 men per pace, which is rather high, but not unreasonable. These troops clearly never adopted a line formation, which at a size of 2,400 men is a large regiment or brigade, is much greater than 160 paces. Still, the density is high when comparing this with real battles, such as Marengo, where the Austrians achieved a density of 10 men per metre. I could be wrong, but I suspect a bit of scale stretching is occurring here, and the actual ground scale is closer to 1 in 5,000 or 1 centimetre equals 50 metres, if not more. If the scale is 1 in 5,000, our playing area can span 3,000 metres, which is still reasonably small considering the number of men we have in that spot. This is totally understandable. Once you get to scales greater than 1 in 5,000, musket fire ranges become rather small at 2 centimetres. The suggested playing area is 2 feet by 2 feet, which represents perhaps an area of 3 kilometres square. If you use the 24-point option, this increases to 3 feet wide or more. Each game turn represents about 15 minutes, which at this scale seems rather low. The first part of Marengo spanned from 1000 to 1400 hours, which would take 12 game turns to play. I must admit I would have expected a timescale of 30 minutes considering the element and ground scale, but with a low number of elements and a rapid game system, I expect it's possible to get through a significant number of game turns rather quickly. Unlike DBA, we don't have the restrictive terrain setup system, but instead something more generic. There are a lot of terrain setup rules, and this is covered reasonably well. The sequence of play is classically simple. Each player conducts movement and combat before the opponent does. A classic I go, you go sequence of play. This is very similar to a standard wargaming sequence of play, and while I feel it has issues, in terms of play simplicity, it cannot be bettered. Each standard 12-point army gets a commander. If only one commander is present, it's called a CNC. If each side is 36 points, there are 3 commanders in a team game. One is a CNC and the other 2 being sub-commanders. If playing the optional rules for larger games, you get a CNC and a number of sub-commanders. The game is very much designed for 12-point armies, of which there is only one commander. But as you may have guessed from the sequence of play, it is optimised for team play if you so wish to go down that particular path. The command system is based on command action points, which with each commander spinning a d6 each game to determine how many caps it has. There are some modifiers, such as the attacker getting an extra 2 caps on game turn 1, and some historical leader modifiers, but for the most part each player spins a d6. The result is the number of caps that commander gets. Nice and simple. The rules achieve a level of historical command control by giving a commander a command radius of 30 centimetres, beyond which it costs extra caps to do anything. As you can see, with an average of 3 caps, spending 2 on something because those forces are too far away, limits the ability of the force to spread out in an unhistorical manner. Thus, at 30 centimetres, the CNC sits in the centre of the playing area and should not wander from this location, if at all possible. There are LOS restrictions as well, so terrain may reduce this range. Once again, a nice and simple manner of reflecting command-control ranges. I'm not going to go into the massive detail of the game system, but in simple terms, it costs 1 cap to move a single element, or any group of elements in base-to-base contact with each other. For those familiar with DBM, DBMM, and of course DBA, this is no surprise. It's a nice and simple way of reflecting the difficulties of getting your army to do what it needs to do without implementing ungainly rules around orders, reaction tests, or other methods to restrict what a commander can get his forces to do. The rules allow for 4 morale or quality classes which provide advantages or disadvantages in direct fire or close combat. Basically, Old Guard gets a +2 in close combat, Elite gets a +1 for direct fire or close combat, Militia Levy get a -1 in close combat, Elite gets an advantage in morale tests, and a Militia gets a disadvantage in morale tests. We also have nationalistic and general modifiers which affect caps. Some commanders can also obtain a benefit when troops are in close combat, but these commanders risk death. These are all optional and would generally not be used in a normal 12-point game. The movement system is very simple, with only 3 movement allowances: good going, bad going, and roads. The rules support a form of strategic movement as well, allowing for double moves. Surprisingly, at this scale, we do have the concept of line or column, attack column being the most important. This consists of 2 musket elements, one behind the other, which gives you a combat advantage. This image shows an example. The element with the flag has an element directly behind, so forms an attack column. Simple and elegant. There are 2 types of combat, fire combat and close combat. As can be seen here, the standard musket range is 5 centimetres, which aligns with a scale of 1 in 2400, but not with the more reasonable scale of 1 in 5000. This is the reason why I think the designers played around with the scales. The combat system adds a D6 with a unit's tactical factor and then combat factors. Combat factors could be 0. 1 point, if you're familiar with DBA, you will know that a target of fire combat or missile combat also spins even though they cannot affect the enemy. This is done so the 2 scores can be compared to determine a result. Because the combat results table is in the sheet section, it does not contain the all-important clue that says elements not being fired upon ignore any result. While still vague, it gives you the clue that the target element does have to spin. This seems to be a slight rules structure gap, but it's not really a major issue. Thus, as an example, a musket element firing another musket element spins a d6, let's say 4, then adds its tactical factors, which includes its morale and situation. In most cases, there may be fire support, but let's assume there is none, so we'll move to the combat factors, which is +4. Thus, the result is 8. The enemy does the same and achieves a value of 7. The difference is not sufficient for any result. If the attacker spun a 6 and the enemy a 1, the results would be 11 versus 5, which is more than 2-to-1 difference, which means the enemy is destroyed. If the attacker achieves a 6 and the enemy a 4, then the enemy would have recoiled. Close combat uses the same system, but the elements need to be in base-to-base contact with each other. A number of modifiers are specific to close combat, with morale being a lot more important. If you have militia, it's best to avoid close combat and keep on firing away with muskets. The combat results do vary by troop type, especially when in close combat, as can be seen here. I find the description a bit confusing, but once you understand what it means, it's easy to remember. The rules does offer an alternate combat system which requires tracking of hits. While this does improve the combat system on many levels, the issue is the game system's main focus is playability, and adding historical complexity goes against this basic design idea behind the actual game system. If you want something more accurate or historical, you would probably adopt a very different game system. I personally only use the original system with all its flaws because it's easier and makes gameplay quicker, but at 15-minute game turns, the alternate combat system is almost certainly more historically accurate. On the other hand, I think the game turn length is also a fudge, with infantry being able to travel 7.5 centimetres or 375 metres in 15 minutes at 1 in 5,000 scale is ambitious but possible. Again, at 1 in 2400 scale, it's 180 metres, which is more reasonable. I suspect a more reasonable game turn scale should be really 30 minutes if the ground scale is 1 in 5000, which means the existing combat system is probably highly optimal. When we look at morale and reaction tests, what can I say? There is no quality, morale or reaction test. This game is so simple there is no need. Any morale is factored into the combat system. This is a major plus for any game system and for gameplay. The alternative combat system does have a morale-like system, but even there it's a very simple one. Once a player has lost 1/3 of all their elements, they've lost. There are some additional special rules, but victory is firmly based on killing enemy elements. In most rules, this results in rather boring games as players try and avoid risk. But due to the dynamic nature of this game system, this is not an issue here. I suppose based on terrain placement, you could end up with a stalemate. This is why you need to be careful about terrain deployment. Now we come to the rules layout. Personally, it's adequate and certainly not as bad as many other sets of rules, but it's certainly not optimal. There is a lot of unnecessary words as well as alternate game systems mixed in with the standard game system. It makes it hard to find rules in the heat of battle. In defence, the game system is so simple that once you've mastered it, there's little need to refer to the rules. But as a learning document, it certainly has issues. On the positive, the videos do help a great deal, but what may be required is a training guide and a reference version of the rules, where all the non-rules words are removed. I may do this myself and format into a 3-column format with 8-point font, which keeps the length of the rules down to about a dozen pages, but it'd be nice if the designers considered reformatting the rules. Place as much bling at the start and at the end, but the actual rules should be short, concise and referenceable. But it's certainly not the worst I have seen, far from it. And it's certainly in the needs, it is certainly in the needs improving group, but it's not really what I would consider a major negative to the success of the rules. Let's look at special rules. This is a difficult question. The nature of the rules encourages a host of special rules. However, because most are contained in the charts and tables, they don't have the normal downside of special rules. I generally find the special rules in DBM, where they exist, do provide a lot of bang for the effort in remembering them, and as they are in the charts and tables, they don't have the normal downside of really people forgetting them all the time. There are a lot of optional rules in the appendix, but these are optional and certainly not something which I would consider as negative in any way. I consider the way that special rules are dealt with in DBM one of the real strengths of the rules, which I would hope is the case considering the design objective of simplicity. The amount of record keeping on the playing area is minimal, which is a major plus. The optional combat system would require record keeping, which I have to admit, considering each side will probably only have 12 elements, is not a major burden. In terms of calculation, this set of rules will not hurt your head. Apart from some minor calculating when you need to add up 3 numbers together, there is no need to be able to do long division in your head. This is again another major plus. When we come to support materials, there are few actual scenarios, but the rules don't really require scenarios. The rules contain a very detailed army list. Each method of calculating force mixes and play can be done very quickly indeed. This is a points style of rules. It is not really optimized for the recreation of historical battles. Thus, I consider this another major strength of the rules. You can pick an army and start playing with really minimal effort. Let's look at an example. This shows an example of 3 Austrian army lists, each for a specific period. The point system is very simple. Any element is 1 point, with M being half a point, militia being half a point, and elite being 1.5 points, and guards 2 points. If there was a supreme strength of the game system, it's how quick and easy you can set up a game on an ad hoc basis. Great for club games or competition games. In conclusion, these rules are surprisingly good. They are simple and reasonably easy to learn if someone is instructing you. I will almost certainly create an examples document to assist players in learning the rules, which would make the job even easier. I should note even experienced players may forget details if the gaps between games is great enough, so such a document is always useful. Play is a pleasure, but it needs to be noted these are element maneuver rules, almost like chess. This gives you a great game, quick, simple, and you get a result, but there is little thought of operational strategy, as with 12 to 17 elements there's little opportunity to pin an enemy, exhaust them and send your reserves in. I expect this is one reason for the optional combat system, so if a player wishes this type of game, that may provide part of what you may want to achieve. On the other hand, players who like to form line, square and column will not be happy with the rules. While the designers have done a great job adding as much historical flavour as possible without impacting its simplicity, it's not a game system focused on duplicating history or getting down to that level of detail. However, this is the real sweet spot in the market these days. There's been a boom of what I call big base rules, where each player gets 6 to 18 big bases consisting of strength points or traditional elements. Examples include Bitchute. These really move the bar into the board game territory, but give you a quick, simple and in some cases historically reasonable games. I've never tried DBM games which involve multiple commands. It goes without question, if you're having team games, this game system should work very well. Thus, 2 players a side will require a playing area 4 feet wide, 3 players 6 feet and so on. Each player gets 12 points and 1 is the CNC. This would work very well. However, what we are seeing is separate games with minimal interaction. The designers make a very good attempt to allow this game system to deal with larger battles, with 1 player a side. Each army consists of corps with sub-commanders which cannot exchange caps, but there is a CNC which can use this cap to command any troops under direct control or may transfer them to sub-commanders. Instead of dicing, each sub-commander has a fixed number of caps. This is a very nice system and works very well. The only issue is player overload. DBM is a chess-like game system where a player really has to focus on how and when he moves his elements carefully. 24 elements may seem reasonable, but once we get to 48 elements, we may end up with a game which is too large. The other major issue is the number of game turns required. Using a traditional combat system, this could be manageable, but the optional combat system adds a much greater load. However, there are lots of rules out there which result in the game which can never be expected to complete in a reasonable time frame. So this is not a major criticism here. I can only bring this up because the original design philosophy was revolutionary and brilliant, and expanding the size may be considered to defeat that. While I find this rather startling, I can't help but compare this game system to Lost Battle, which is an area movement ancient set of rules. Both strip away as much bling as possible to result in a set of rules which allow you to have a good game. DBM is quicker, simpler and possibly less historical. Apart from this comparison, I can't think of many rules like these rules. I play a club set of rules called Tullian back in the 1990s, which was also based on DBA, but it was always designed to be a set of rules which required 50 elements a side on a larger table. There was no provision for a 2-foot square game. I simply borrowed a number of DBA game system elements rather than being DBA. I converted a game system into Napoleonics, which has some elements of this rules, but the main influence was DBM or DBMM, although the core game system was based on Bruce Retail's Core Commander, or a quick play version of it. So I can't compare that particular attempt to DBN. But all these rules are club-free rules or free rules, so are in the area of commercial. So in the area of commercial rules, DBN is a standalone. This is a good thing because it fills a gap in the market, which is what new rules should always aim for. And this set of rules really do fill a current gap that needs to be filled. In terms of scale, I've raised this previously, but I can't help but think the game designers had to make some compromises to achieve their objective. The ground scale for movement and fire combat is clearly 1 in 2400, which matches the game turn length of 15 minutes. But the element scale looks like it's closer to 1 in 5000. If I'm correct, the simple solution is to simply state the element scale is halved. Thus, an infantry element represents 1000 to 1200 men, and we solve the problem, assuming this was even a problem. This also reduces the size of a 12-point force mixed to 10,000 to 12,000 men, closer to a French corps, although not a Prussian corps. But this has no impact on the game system, so it's more a personal comment or observation. The game system is very good. Gameplay excellent, detail and historical accuracy suffers as a result, but that was never the primary objective. The designers have done a brilliant job converting DBA into a Napoleonic system, and I think a good job in allowing for larger games. I personally feel larger games should use something like the DBMM or DBM game system, but using DBA system is, it's still quite reasonable. The rules layout is acceptable, certainly not great. The best way to learn the rules is to have someone show you how to play. The videos help, but they do gloss over a lot of the detail. The videos are more a video of a game rather than training material, but they do help. I personally would consider reformatting the rules, adding more cross-referencing and creating a separate examples document to help new players learn the game system. But I have to admit I could say the same thing about almost every other set of Napoleonic rules I possess. So this is no failure on from the designer's point of view. I would strongly recommend these rules to anyone. The rules can be found from the URL provided, and you can download a PDF version if you so desire. And so we come to an end of episode 6 of my video series on rules review, in this case providing an overview of the DBM rules. Alle guten Dinge kommen zu einem Ende.